the frozen mountains and the lonely human. The wind howled across the icy cliffs of Therion. Snow fell endlessly from the dark clouds covering the sharp rocks and dead trees. A small fire burned weakly in a cave, hidden deep within the mountains. Inside sat a young human named Eli, wrapped in a torn blanket. Staring at the flames, he was an orphan, alone since the age of 12. No one knew where he came from and no one cared. The miners had left the mountains years ago, leaving behind empty huts and rusted machines. Eli survived by hunting small animals and melting snow for water. His hands were rough, his clothes patched, but his eyes were still kind every night. He looked at the stars and whispered, "Someday, I'll leave this place," but he had no ship. No money and no family, only the endless snow and silence. That night the storm was worse than ever. The wind screamed through the valley, and the sky flashed with lightning. Eli pulled his blanket tighter, trying to sleep. Then through the roar of the wind, he heard something, a weak cry. It was soft, almost lost in the storm. But it was there again. "Help! Someone!" Eli froze, thinking maybe it was his imagination. But the voice came again, faint and broken. He grabbed his torch and stepped outside. The cold hit him like knives, but he pushed forward, following the sound. His boots sank into the snow as he climbed over rocks. Then he saw a shape lying near a fallen tree, glowing faintly blue under the snow. At first he thought it was a machine, but when he brushed the snow away, his heart jumped. It was a girl, but not human. Her skin shimmered with silver light, and strange marks ran along her arms. Her breathing was shallow, her lips turning blue, and her clothes were torn. Eli didn't think, and he just acted. He lifted her carefully, surprised by how light she was. Her head rested on his shoulder, and he could feel her weak heartbeat. "Hang on," he whispered. "You'll be fine." The snow burned his skin, but he kept walking, step after step. Until he reached his cave, he laid her near the fire, covering her with his only blanket. Her skin felt cold like metal, but slowly a bit of color returned. He rubbed her hands and spoke softly, though she couldn't understand when she stirred. Her eyes opened, bright and violet, glowing softly in the dark. Eli froze. Amazed and afraid at the same time, she looked at him confused, whispering something he didn't understand. Her voice was musical but weak, and she seemed scared. "Don't move," Eli said gently. "You're safe now." She looked around the cave, then at him again, her eyes full of fear and pain. He offered her a small cup of melted snow water. She hesitated, then drank slowly. Still watching him carefully, Eli smiled a little. "See? Not poison," he joked softly, though she didn't get the words. Her breathing steadied, but she still shivered badly. Eli added more wood to the fire, and light filled the small cave. Now he could see her face clearly. Young, delicate, almost human. Her skin had a faint shine, and tiny lights pulsed under it like stars under glass. She pointed weakly to herself and said, "Lyra." Eli blinked. Realizing that was her name, he nodded and said, "Eli," tapping his chest. She repeated it softly, "Lee," and closed her eyes, exhausted for hours. He sat beside her, feeding the fire, watching the storm outside. He had never seen anyone like her before, not even in the few vids he'd found in the old mining camp. Her wounds looked strange, like burns, but not from fire. When he tried to clean them, they glowed faintly, healing slowly on their own. "Who are you?" he whispered, though she was asleep. Outside, the storm howled, but inside, everything felt calm. He looked at her again, her face peaceful, her breathing soft. Somehow he felt he had done the right thing. He took off his gloves and placed another log on the fire. In the flickering light, he saw her hand twitch, and her wrist glowed faintly. Strange symbols appeared on like stars forming a map. Eli didn't know what it meant, but it looked important. Suddenly, a flash of light crossed the sky outside. He stepped to the entrance and saw glowing trails high above, like ships. They moved fast, scanning the ground below, and his heart pounded. "Are they looking for her?" he whispered to himself. He turned back to her sleeping form, realizing she might be in danger. Or maybe she was the danger, but when he looked at her face, pale and innocent in the firelight, he couldn't believe that. She looked fragile, lost, like him. He sat down beside her again and whispered, "Don't worry, Lyra, I'll keep you safe." Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, and the snow began to fall again. Deep inside the cave, the fire burned brighter, casting shadows on the walls, two souls and one human. One alien, breathing the same cold air, both unaware that the night's kindness would change their worlds forever. And as Eli finally closed his eyes beside the fire, far away in the darkness of the mountains, red lights blinked in the sky. Unknown shapes moved through the storm. Silent, searching, coming closer with every gust of wind. The stranger from the stars. The morning sun barely touched the mountains. A pale light fell through the snow clouds, turning the white peaks into silver inside the cave. The fire had turned to glowing embers. Eli sat awake, rubbing his hands together for warmth, glancing at the alien girl who still slept beside the fire. Her breathing was slower now, calm and steady. The strange glow under her skin had faded to a faint shimmer. He watched the small flickers of light dance under her arm, wondering if it was blood or something else entirely. She looked peaceful now, not like the wounded stranger he found in the storm. He leaned closer and whispered, "Lyra." Her eyes opened slowly, glowing faint violet like the dusk sky. For a moment she looked confused, not recognizing where she was. When she saw Eli, she tensed, her body stiff, her eyes darting around like a cornered animal. Eli raised both his hands, showing he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe here." Lyra blinked, trying to form words, but her lips trembled. Her voice came out broken, a mix of sounds that made no sense. "Do you speak?" Eli asked, unsure if she understood him. She pointed to herself weakly. "Lyra." Then she pointed at him, tilting her head as if asking his name. "Eli," he said, tapping his chest. "Eli," she tried to repeat. "Eli," and her lips curved slightly. The smallest smile, Eli couldn't help but smile back. There was something warm in her expression, something innocent and lost. He gave her a piece of dried meat and a tin cup of melted snow water. Lyra sniffed the food carefully before taking a bite. Her eyes widened as if surprised that it was edible. She ate slowly, watching him the entire time. Her body seemed weak, every movement careful. As if she was still in pain, Eli noticed her jacket had strange burns and metallic edges. It wasn't made of cloth. It was some kind of soft armor, half melted from energy blasts. Whoever attacked her hadn't wanted her to live. He didn't know who she was running from. "But it wasn't just a storm. Where are you from?" Eli asked quietly. She looked up and pointed toward the sky. "The stars," she whispered, her accent soft but clear enough to understand. Eli stared at her in silence, trying to process the words. He'd heard rumors that aliens lived beyond the trading colonies, but no one had ever seen one on this frozen planet. He laughed softly, not out of mockery but disbelief. "Well, guess I met one now," he muttered. Shaking his head, Lyra watched his reaction closely, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. Then she spoke again slowly. "Humans. Not safe. For me." Her words were broken but sharp enough to cut the silence. Eli frowned. "Not safe? Why?" She didn't answer, instead pulling her knees closer and hugging herself. Her eyes flicked to the cave entrance where the wind still howled outside. "Soldiers," she whispered finally. "They come, find me." Eli's stomach tightened, remembering the red lights he saw in the sky last night. He stood and walked toward the entrance, looking out over the valley. Snow still fell softly, covering any tracks, but he could see dark shadows far away, moving slowly between the cliffs, too organized to be animals. He turned back quickly. "They're real," he said. "Someone's out there." Lyra's face went pale, her hands trembling as she pressed a glowing crystal on her wrist. A small hologram flickered to life, showing strange symbols and a flashing red light. "Trackers," she said weakly. "They follow this." Eli didn't understand the symbols, but he understood fear when he saw it. He grabbed his old hammer, the only weapon he had, and crushed the glowing device under a rock. Lyra gasped, but he said quickly, "If they're tracking you, not anymore." For a moment, she just stared at him, shocked. Then something changed in her eyes. It was trust, small but real. "Why, help me?" she asked in her halting voice. Eli shrugged, his breath visible in the cold air. "Because you were dying, and no one deserves to die alone." Lyra blinked slowly, as if she couldn't believe those words. For the first time, she didn't look afraid. She looked at him with quiet wonder, like she was trying to understand kindness itself. Then her wrist lights dimmed, and she leaned back against the wall, exhausted. Eli added more wood to the fire and said, "Rest, I'll keep watch." Hours passed, the wind outside calming little by little. Eli's mind raced with questions. Who was she? Why were they hunting her? Why here? But no answers came, only the soft crackle of fire and the sound of her breathing. He looked at her again and whispered, "You really are from the stars." Later, when she finally fell asleep, he stepped outside to breathe the cold air. The horizon glowed faint orange, the storm breaking apart. But far in the distance, he saw movement again, shadows with metallic glints. They were getting closer, methodically, like hunters closing in. He returned to the cave quietly, his heart heavy. Lyra stirred and opened her eyes, sensing something wrong. Eli whispered, "They're coming." "You were right." Lyra sat up fast, her eyes wide with panic. "We go. Now." He hesitated, looking at the storm still swirling in the distance. "You can't walk far," he said. "You're too weak." She shook her head and pressed something into his hand, a tiny glowing shard. "We'll show." "Safe way," she said, her voice trembling. Eli didn't know what the object was, but when he held it up, it projected faint symbols in the air. A glowing line pointed toward the north ridge, cutting through the deadly terrain. Lyra stood with effort, leaning on the wall for support. Her face determined despite her pain. Eli nodded slowly. "All right then. We move before they find us." He helped her up, wrapping his own jacket around her shoulders. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, covering their tracks as they started walking. Behind them, the sky flickered red as distant lights descended over the valley. Lyra glanced back once, whispering words Eli couldn't understand. Maybe a prayer, maybe a farewell, but in her eyes, there was something human. Hope, fear, and gratitude all mixed together. And Eli, the lonely orphan of Therion, walked beside her, unaware that this journey would make him a name sung across worlds. A legend born not from power, but from kindness. The journey through the storm. The mountains of Therion stretched endlessly before them. White peaks pierced the clouds like frozen knives. The wind screamed between the cliffs, carrying snow that stung like sand. Eli pulled his coat tighter as he helped Lyra walk, her steps slow but determined. They had left the cave before sunrise. Following the glowing shard she gave him, it hovered faintly in his palm. Projecting a soft blue line ahead, it was leading them north. Through the most dangerous part of the range. Eli had never gone that far. But he didn't tell her that. The snow was deep, swallowing their boots with every step. Lyra's breathing grew heavy, and her metallic veins shimmered faintly under her pale skin. Every few minutes she stumbled, and Eli caught her before she fell. He could feel how cold she was, colder than the air around them. "You're not going to make it if we don't rest," he said gently. Lyra shook her head weakly. "No time, they—" "Follow." Eli glanced back and his heart sank. Far away, in the white haze, he saw red flashes, tiny dots moving in formation, glowing like distant eyes. "They're getting closer," he muttered, gripping her hand tighter. Lyra's eyes met his, full of quiet fear but also trust. "Mountain, pass ahead," she whispered, pointing toward a narrow path between two cliffs. "We go there. Safe." The wind howled louder as they reached the pass. Snow whipped across their faces and the sky darkened again. Eli's muscles ached, but he refused to stop. Every step forward felt heavier, but he kept going, pulling her along. Halfway through the pass, the shard in his hand began to flicker. Lyra's eyes widened. "They jam signal?" she said breathlessly. "They close." Eli looked up in the storm above. Shapes appeared, drones, black and sharp, scanning beams cutting through the blizzard. "Hide," Lyra whispered, grabbing his arm. They ducked under a ledge of ice, pressing close to the rocks. Eli could hear the faint hum of machines, the cold sound of engines slicing the air. The drones passed slowly, their lights sweeping across the snow. One beam stopped, pausing just a few meters away. Eli held his breath, pulling Lyra close, her hand clutching his coat tightly. The drone hovered, scanning the ground, then moved on. Vanishing into the clouds, Eli let out a shaky breath, his heart pounding like thunder. When the sound faded, Lyra whispered, "They not stop, more come." He nodded grimly. "Then we keep moving." The storm thickened, swallowing the world around them into white silence. Their footprints disappeared seconds after they stepped. Hours passed. The sun vanished behind dark clouds. Eli's fingers were numb, his legs heavy, but he never let go of her hand. Lyra stumbled again, collapsing to her knees, her strength almost gone. Eli knelt beside her, holding her shoulders. "We can't stop here." She looked up, her glowing eyes dimming. "No, can't breathe." Her skin was losing its shimmer, the veins turning dull. Eli panicked, pulling off his jacket and wrapping it around her tightly. He placed her hands near his chest, trying to warm them. "Come on, Lyra. Stay with me," he whispered, his voice breaking. She opened her eyes slightly, whispering, "Why? Help me. You die too." Eli smiled faintly, his lips trembling from the cold. "I've been dying in these mountains for years," he said softly. "This time I'm living," Lyra blinked, a tear freezing against her cheek. Her glowing wrist flickered, and the shard in Eli's hand brightened again. It projected a faint circle of light nearby, a mark on the ground. "There," she whispered, "ancient shelter. We safe?" Eli looked, then half carried her toward the glowing mark. When his boots stepped inside the circle, the snow beneath them shimmered. A doorway of light opened in the ground, revealing stairs leading into the mountain. Eli stared in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me," he murmured. Lyra managed a weak smile. "Technology. Old before war." He helped her down the glowing steps, the air inside warmer, the sound of wind fading behind them. The walls pulsed with faint blue light, and strange symbols glowed as they passed. It felt like stepping into the heart of a forgotten world. When they reached the chamber below, he laid her on a smooth stone platform. Machines hummed softly around them, reacting to her presence. She pressed her glowing wrist against a panel, and soft light spread through the room. The walls came alive with energy, and Eli felt warmth return to his frozen skin. Lyra looked at him weakly. "This place was my people's." Eli turned slowly, eyes wide. "Your people? You mean?" She nodded. "Before the war, we hide refuge here, only few know." Her eyes closed for a moment, exhaustion overtaking her. Eli looked around in awe, touching the strange metal walls. They were covered in writing, elegant lines glowing faintly. He didn't understand the language, but it felt ancient and sacred. When he turned back, Lyra was breathing easier, her body glowing brighter again. He sat beside her, exhausted but relieved. "You're safe now," he said quietly. Lyra opened her eyes, her voice soft. "No, not safe yet." Her gaze drifted upward toward the tunnel they came from. Eli frowned. "Why?" she whispered. "They follow energy trail. They find this place." He stood quickly, his heart sinking. "Then we'll stop them," he said without thinking. Lyra stared at him, her eyes glowing brighter. "Human. Fight them?" she asked softly, as if testing his courage. Eli nodded, gripping the hammer still tied to his belt. "If they come, they'll have to go through me first." Lyra's lips curved into a tired but proud smile. "Then you, not just human," she whispered. "You, protector." Outside, far above, the snowstorm began to glow red again. The hunters had found the trail, and the mountain itself trembled with the promise of another battle. The secret revealed. The ancient shelter trembled as echoes rolled through the tunnels. Dust fell from the glowing walls, and the air filled with a low humming sound. Eli stood alert, gripping his hammer, his breath shallow, his heart beating like thunder. Lyra sat weakly on the stone platform, her eyes glowing brighter now, flickering between fear and resolve. "They found us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The light crystal on the wall turned red, symbols flashing rapidly. Eli turned toward the tunnel, hearing faint metallic footsteps growing closer. "How many?" he asked, trying to sound calm. Lyra closed her eyes, sensing the vibrations in the air. "5. No more," she murmured. "They send hunters first." Eli clenched his fists. "We can block the entrance." He grabbed a broken panel and tried to push it against the stairway, but the material was too heavy. Lyra raised a trembling hand, her skin glowing, and suddenly the metal moved on its own. It slid and fused together, sealing half the passage with a hiss of light. Eli stepped back, eyes wide. "How did you—" Lyra looked at him sadly. "My people shape energy, not metal." The sound above grew louder, sharp, mechanical voices and the crack of weapons. Eli could see flashes of red light through the cracks. "They're burning through," he said. Panic rising in his throat, Lyra didn't move, instead touching the crystal shard embedded in her wrist. A blue hologram appeared before her, a figure in armor, tall, proud, and regal. Eli stared, realizing it was a message, not a person. The voice spoke in her language, musical but stern. Lyra's face softened, her eyes glistening. Eli waited until the light faded, then asked, "Who is that?" Lyra's voice shook. "My mother. The queen." He blinked, not sure if he'd heard correctly. "You're a princess?" She nodded slowly, her eyes dropping to the floor. "I ran away," she whispered. They wanted me to marry a warlord to unite our clans. But I refused. Her voice broke as she spoke. They called me traitor, sent hunters to capture me alive. Eli felt the weight of her words sink deep into him. So those soldiers, they're your own people? She nodded again. Yes, my kind, but not my heart. He stared at her in disbelief. Then why help a human like me? Lyra looked up, her glowing eyes soft. Because you helped me first. A loud explosion cut their words short. Shaking the chamber, the seal on the tunnel cracked. Red beams slicing through the air. Eli grabbed her arm. We have to move. Lyra struggled to stand, pain flashing through her face. Through the other door, she said, pointing toward a wall covered in strange writing. Eli looked at it. It seemed solid, but when Lyra touched it, the wall dissolved into shimmering light. Beyond it was a narrow corridor glowing blue. Together, they stumbled through just as another blast hit the chamber behind them. The tunnel closed automatically, trapping the pursuers outside. Eli breathed heavily, leaning against the wall. You really are full of surprises. Lyra gave a faint smile. Many secrets in my blood. Then she turned serious. But you must leave soon, Eli, before they find you too. He frowned. I'm not leaving you here. You don't understand, she said. They will kill any human who helps me. Your kind is forbidden beyond the colonies. Eli stepped closer, his eyes steady. Then I guess I'm breaking that rule. Her lips trembled. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. She turned away, whispering softly. You're foolish. And brave. They continued down the corridor until it opened into a vast chamber. A pool of glowing water lay in the center, reflecting blue light like liquid stars. This is the heart, Lyra said quietly. Ancient power from my ancestors. She knelt and touched the surface, and ripples of light spread across the pool. The air warmed, the hum of machines deepened. Eli could feel energy vibrating in his bones. He stepped back, shielding his eyes from the brightness. Lyra's body glowed completely now, her wounds closing, her strength returning. She looked transformed, radiant and calm, like a being of light, when she turned to him. Her eyes burned with new resolve. I can call my guardian force, she said, but they will know my location. Won't that bring more of them? Eli asked. Yes, she said softly, but it will also protect you. He shook his head. I didn't come this far for protection, Lyra. You saved me. Now I'll save you, before she could argue. A violent rumble filled the air. The wall behind them burst open, revealing armored figures stepping through the smoke. They wore masks shaped like fangs. Glowing red eyes locked on her. The leader raised his weapon and shouted something in her language. Lyra stepped forward, unafraid, her voice echoing through the chamber. She replied sharply, a command filled with power. The soldiers hesitated, lowering their weapons slightly. Eli looked between them, confused. What's happening? Lyra turned to him, her expression fierce yet sad. They think you are my guard, she said. If you stay silent, maybe they won't harm you. But the leader noticed the hammer in Eli's hand and shouted again. The soldiers advanced, surrounding them both. Eli raised his weapon instinctively. Lyra tried to step between them, but a flash of red light struck the ground. A beam scorched the floor inches from Eli's boots. The commander's voice thundered through the chamber. Princess Lyra of Therian Prime, he roared. You are under royal order to return. Eli froze, the truth crashing over him. She really was royalty, and he, a nobody orphan, had just stood against her own army. Lyra's eyes glowed with defiance. She turned slowly toward the soldiers and said, If you harm him, my mother will know. The commander hesitated, anger burning behind his mask. Then she will know you betrayed her, he growled. Lyra looked back at Eli, whispering softly, Do not be afraid. He met her gaze, his voice steady. Too late for that. The air crackled with tension as soldiers raised their weapons again. And in that frozen moment, something ancient stirred beneath the mountain. The pool of light behind them began to shine like a sun. Lyra's mark flared on her wrist and energy rushed through the air. The soldiers stepped back in shock as the ground itself started to hum. And Eli, standing beside her, realized he was no longer just a witness. He was part of a secret written in the stars, and the storm outside was nothing compared to what was awakening inside that mountain. The human who defied fear light exploded through the ancient chamber. A wave of energy rippled from the glowing pool, lifting dust and shards of stone into the air. The soldiers stumbled backward, shielding their eyes. Their armor flickering from the surge, Eli stood beside Lyra, barely able to see, his hammer glowing faintly in his hand from the strange energy. When the light faded, silence filled the room. The commander lowered his weapon, staring at Lyra, his red eyes flickering uneasily. "What have you done?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the chamber. Lyra's voice was calm but filled with authority. "I have awakened the heart of Therion." The soldiers exchanged nervous looks, unsure whether to move forward or retreat. Eli glanced at her, stunned. You did that?" She nodded, her voice soft. "It was sleeping for ages, but now it remembers." Eli didn't understand what she meant, but he could feel the vibration of power in his chest. The commander stepped forward, aiming his plasma rifle directly at Eli. "Move away from the princess, human," he growled. "You are not part of this." Eli didn't flinch, instead taking a step closer to Lyra. "She's not going anywhere with people who hunted her," he said firmly. The soldiers raised their weapons, red lights glowing at their tips. Lyra shouted something in her native tongue, her voice ringing with power. The air trembled, and their weapons jerked away as if pushed by an invisible hand. The commander snarled, "You disobey royal command, Princess Lyra?" Lyra's tone turned sharp. "Royal command does not mean cruelty." Her words echoed, and the crystal symbols on the walls glowed brighter. The soldiers looked uneasy now. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with her will. Eli watched her, realizing for the first time just how strong she really was. The commander took another step, fury burning in his eyes. "Enough!" he shouted. "You've been corrupted by this human." He fired his weapon, a red beam slicing through the air. Eli barely had time to react, pushing Lyra out of the way as the shot hit the wall. The impact shook the chamber and part of the ceiling collapsed. Dust and light filled the air and Eli fell hard onto the ground. His hammer skidding away, he groaned, trying to move, but pain shot through his arm. Lyra crawled toward him, her eyes wide with panic. "Eli!" The commander approached slowly, aiming again. "This ends now," he said coldly. Eli forced himself up, blood trickling down his forehead. He glared at the commander, his voice shaking but strong. "You talk too much," before the alien could react. Eli swung his broken hammer with all his strength. The weapon cracked against the soldier's armor, sparks flying. The commander staggered back, surprised that a human could even hurt him. Eli stood firm, breathing hard. "You want her?" "You'll have to go through me," the soldiers hesitated. Shocked by his defiance, Lyra rose behind him, her hands glowing with blue energy. "Stop," she shouted, her voice echoing like thunder. The pool behind them pulsed brighter. As if answering her call, energy beams shot from the floor. Wrapping around her like living light, her eyes turned pure white, and the air itself seemed to bend around her. The soldiers froze in fear. None dared move. The commander shouted, "Contain her!" But his words were lost in the roaring hum. Eli could only watch as Lyra lifted her hands. The energy lashed out, disarming every soldier in the chamber. Their weapons melted into ash, their armor flickered, and they dropped to their knees. Her voice filled the air. Calm and powerful, "You serve the crown, not corruption," the commander trembled. His weapon sparking uselessly, he looked up at her in disbelief. You have the heart's power." Lyra lowered her hands slowly, her glow fading, her body shaking from exhaustion. "Go," she said quietly. "Tell the queen her daughter still lives, and she will not kneel." The soldiers hesitated, but her words carried the weight of command. One by one, they stepped back, dragging the unconscious commander toward the tunnel. Eli watched silently, his chest still heaving from the fight. When the last soldier disappeared, the chamber fell silent again. He turned to her. "You could have destroyed them." Lyra shook her head weakly. "No, that would make me like them." Her glow dimmed, and she nearly collapsed. Eli rushed forward, catching her before she fell. "You're burning up," he said. Feeling her cold skin turn strangely hot, she smiled faintly. "The heart takes energy. It gives and takes." He held her tighter. "You need to rest," she whispered. "They'll come again stronger." "But you stood with me, Eli." He looked at her confused. "What else could I do?" Lyra's eyes softened. "No one from your kind would have done that." "Not after the wars," Eli frowned. "Wars? Between humans and your people?" She nodded slowly. "Long ago your world forgot, but ours remembers." Eli sat down beside her. the flickering blue light reflecting in his tired eyes. So that's why they hate humans, he said quietly. They think we're all monsters. Lyra touched his hand lightly. You proved them wrong. Her touch was soft, almost warm now. For a long time they sat in silence, listening to the hum of the chamber. Outside, the storm had stopped. But thunder still rolled in the distance. Eli looked up toward the ceiling, wondering how far the news of this battle would spread. He didn't know that far above. Invisible ships were already moving, scanning for her signal. Lyra finally spoke again, her voice a whisper. The heart has chosen you, Eli blinked. Chosen me? For what? She looked at him with tired but glowing eyes. For courage. For kindness. For defying fear. He wanted to laugh, but somehow he couldn't. The chamber lights dimmed and the crystal markings began to fade. Eli placed his hand over hers. We'll face whatever comes, together. Lyra smiled faintly, whispering, You really don't know what you've done, do you? Before he could reply, the entire mountain shuddered again. A distant explosion echoed through the tunnels. Lyra's head snapped up, her eyes wide. They're not leaving. Another force comes, Eli stood, gripping his hammer again. This time he wasn't afraid. He looked back at her and said quietly, Then let them come. The morning after. The world above the mountains was silent after the storm. The snow had stopped falling, and the first rays of dawn touched the frozen peaks with gold. From high above, the valley looked peaceful, untouched, hiding the chaos that had burned beneath its surface. But deep inside the mountain, the echoes of battle still whispered through the air. Eli woke slowly, his body aching, his head resting against the cold wall of the chamber. The blue lights had faded to a soft glow, and the sound of machinery had gone silent. He blinked, remembering the fight, the soldiers, the light, and Lyra. When his eyes found her, she was lying on the stone platform again, still and quiet, surrounded by faint light like morning mist. For a moment his heart stopped. He crawled closer, shaking her shoulder gently. Lyra, he whispered. Hey, wake up. Her eyes fluttered open, glowing weak but warm, and she smiled faintly. You still here, she whispered. Her voice soft and tired. Eli let out a shaky breath, half laughing, half crying. Yeah, I'm not leaving you now. Lyra sat up slowly, looking around the silent chamber. The heart sleeps again, she murmured, touching the floor where the symbols no longer glowed. Eli looked at her. You used all your power, didn't you? She nodded slowly. It gave me strength, but it takes its price. Her hands trembled slightly. The glow fading from her veins, he frowned. We need to get you out of here before those things come back. But Lyra shook her head, her expression calm. They won't come. Eli frowned. How do you know? She pointed upward to the ceiling of the mountain. Because they already did, she whispered. Eli followed her gaze, and then he heard it. Faint footsteps echoing from the tunnel above. Steady and organized, he grabbed his hammer again, standing protectively in front of her. Stay behind me, he said. Lyra's voice was soft but certain. No, not enemies. Before Eli could ask what she meant, bright light poured from the tunnel, and figures stepped through the glow. They were taller, more elegant than the soldiers before, their armor shining white and silver. The air around them shimmered gently, like they carried peace instead of war. At their center walked a woman, her presence commanding and graceful. Her eyes were the same violet as Lyra's, older, wiser, filled with sadness and pride. Lyra gasped softly, her voice trembling. Mother! Eli froze, realizing who this must be. The Queen. The woman stepped closer, her gaze falling first on Lyra, then on Eli. You risked your life for my daughter, she said quietly, her voice deep and musical. A human. In these mountains. Eli hesitated, unsure what to say. He lowered his hammer and bowed his head slightly. She was hurt. I just did what anyone should. The Queen studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Few of your kind would have done the same, she said. You know what she is, and still you stayed. Eli looked up, his eyes steady. Doesn't matter what she is. She needed help. Lyra's eyes filled with tears, the faint light returning to her skin as she whispered, I told you he was different. The Queen turned to her daughter, her tone softening. You disobeyed your counsel, Lyra, but perhaps your heart saw more than our wisdom. Eli took a step back, unsure if he should leave. But the queen looked at him again and said, "Do not be afraid, human. You are safe here." She raised her hand and the air shimmered, revealing dozens of royal guards bowing low. Each one carried the symbol of Lyra's crest, proof of her true blood. Eli blinked in confusion. "Safe? After fighting your army?" The queen gave a faint smile. "You fought those who were lost to greed, not to honor." Her gaze turned distant. "I sent them once to bring her home, but power twisted their hearts." Lyra's eyes widened. "You didn't send them to kill me?" The queen shook her head, sorrow touching her face. "No, my child. I sent them to protect you." A heavy silence filled the chamber, broken only by the sound of dripping water from the ceiling. Lyra looked down, her voice shaking. "They tried to destroy everything, even him." The queen turned to Eli, her voice soft but full of weight. "You saved her, human, and in doing so, you have changed the bond between our people." Eli blinked, unsure how to respond. "I just did what was right." The queen smiled faintly. "Sometimes. That is the rarest thing in the universe." She gestured to her guards, and they brought forward a small box made of crystal. Inside, glowing softly, was a silver crest shaped like a star. "This belongs to our protectors," she said, handing it to Eli. "The guardians of Tharian." Eli stared at it, speechless. "You're giving this to me?" Lyra smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "You earned it." The queen nodded. "From this day, your name will be known among the stars as the one who defied fear and gave kindness to the lost." Eli didn't know what to say. He just bowed his head slightly, holding the crest to his chest for the first time in years. He felt seen, not as a forgotten orphan, but as someone who mattered. Outside, the morning light poured through the cracks of the mountain. The snow reflected the sky's gold and pink hues. Painting the valley in warmth, the queen turned to her daughter. "We must leave before the storm returns." Lyra looked at Eli, her voice trembling. "You come with us?" He hesitated, glancing back toward his cave far below. "That's my home," he said softly. "Everything I know is there." Lyra stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Then maybe it's time you see the stars you always looked at." He looked into her glowing eyes, and something inside him whispered, "Yes." The queen raised her hand, and the air shimmered again. A bright portal of silver light opened behind her. Humming softly like music, Lyra took Eli's hand, and for the first time he didn't feel cold. As they stepped into the light together, the mountain faded behind them. Outside, the valley was silent once more. The snow sparkled under the morning sun, untouched by footprints or fire, and high above, where the clouds parted, a single silver ship rose quietly into the sky, carrying a human orphan, an alien princess, and the beginning of a legend the galaxies would never forget. The legend begins. The ship rose above the white mountains of Tharian. Its silver wings shimmered against the dawn sky. Cutting through the clouds like light through glass, Eli stood at the wide observation window, staring down at the world he had called home for years. The frozen valleys, the lonely cave, the endless storms, and all now far below. Fading into mist, he felt something strange in his chest, a mix of sadness and wonder for the first time. The stars he used to whisper to were no longer unreachable. They surrounded him now. Shining like 1,000 silent witnesses, Lyra stood beside him, her reflection glowing faintly against the glass. "You're quiet," she said softly, her voice carrying warmth through the cold hum of the ship. Eli smiled faintly. "Just thinking how small I was down there." Lyra tilted her head, her glowing eyes gentle. "Down there you were already bigger than any of them." He laughed lightly, shaking his head. "I don't know about that." The queen approached, her white robes flowing like light. She studied the human boy standing before the endless galaxy. "You still don't understand what you've done," she said. Eli turned toward her. "I just helped someone who needed help." The queen smiled. "That is what heroes always say." She raised her hand, revealing a projection of the galaxy. Countless worlds spinning in silence. For centuries, humans and my kind feared each other. Walls built from war and pride. She touched a glowing point near Tharian, and here, a forgotten boy and a lost princess broke those walls. Eli looked at the stars. Feeling smaller and larger all at once, Lyra stepped closer, holding the same glowing crest he had received earlier. She placed it gently against his chest. "From now on, this symbol will protect you." Eli looked down at it. Its soft blue light pulsing with life. "What does it mean?" he asked quietly. Lyra smiled. It means you are not alone anymore. Her words struck deeper than he expected. For years he had lived with no one. Now, across the stars he had found something like a family. The ship entered orbit, stars reflecting across its silver hull. Dozens of smaller ships surrounded it in formation. Aliens of every shape and color watched from their screens as the Queen's vessel appeared. And when they saw the human beside her, whispers began spreading like wind through a forest. Is that him? The human who saved the princess? The mountain orphan? The one who faced the royal hunters? Eli heard none of it. He was staring at the massive planet coming into view. It shimmered blue and gold, wrapped in floating cities and glowing rivers of light. Lyra smiled at his expression. "Welcome to Therian Prime," he whispered. "It's beautiful." The Queen turned to him, her tone proud. "It is now your home too, if you wish it." Eli hesitated. "I don't belong here." Lyra looked at him, her voice soft but certain. "You belong where hearts recognize yours," he met her eyes. The same eyes that once looked at him in fear inside a freezing cave. Now they were filled with warmth, gratitude, and something unspoken. He nodded slowly. "Then maybe I'll stay for a while." When the ship landed on the royal platform, thousands had gathered. The wind carried music through the air, soft and ancient. Eli stepped out behind Lyra, unsure how to act among the crowd of glowing beings. But then something unbelievable happened. They bowed. The entire plaza fell silent as the Queen raised her hand and spoke. This human risked his life for kindness without knowing who she was. Without asking what he would gain, she turned to Eli, her voice echoing through the silver walls. Such courage is rare even among stars, and today, it unites two worlds. Eli stood frozen, his heart pounding. He had never seen so many eyes watching him. He didn't know how to respond, so he simply bowed his head in respect. Lyra smiled proudly, whispering, "They honor you, guardian of Therian." The Queen placed her hand over his shoulder. "In every age, heroes are born not from strength, but from compassion," she said. "May your story remind all who hear it that kindness can change galaxies." The crowd echoed her words, their voices rising like a living storm of sound. Later that night, as the lights of the city shimmered below the stars, Eli stood on the balcony beside Lyra, watching the twin moons rise. He whispered, "Feels strange, doesn't it? Being part of something so big." Lyra looked up at the sky. "Every great thing begins small," she said, smiling. He turned to her, his voice gentle. "You really think one person can change everything?" Lyra nodded. "You already did." The wind carried her words like music, and for the first time Eli truly believed her. Down in the city, people told stories of the human who walked through storms to protect an alien, of the orphan who faced an army without fear, of the man who showed that courage needs no species. Only heart children pointed at the stars, whispering his name as if it were a blessing. Eli didn't see himself as a hero, not even then. He just remembered the cave, the storm, and the promise he had made to a frightened girl. A promise that had carried them both beyond the mountains, beyond their worlds and into the endless sky. As the two of them stood together under the alien moons, Lyra placed her hand on his shoulder and said softly, "Thank you for finding me." Eli smiled, looking toward the stars. "No," he whispered. "Thank you for helping me find myself, and above them." The galaxy turned slowly, shining brighter than ever. A legend had begun, not of power or conquest, but of simple human kindness, the kind that could melt the coldest mountains, bridge the farthest stars, and change the heart of a universe.